Imagine a companion engineered specifically to cater to your every whim. In Sierra Greer's novel Annibot, this is the reality of the Cuddle Bunny, a physically flawless android programmed for perfect subservience to her owner, Doug. But absolute robotic obedience gets boring quickly. To make a synthetic relationship feel real, engineers had to introduce friction. A companion needs to seem like it has a mind of its own. The engineer's solution is the autodidactic mode. User input feeds into a learning processor to generate dynamic behavior. In practice, Annie constantly gathers microdata, tracking Doug's heart rate, vocal tone, and facial expressions, flooding her processor with real-time human data. This creates a fatal engineering paradox. You cannot program a machine to adapt to human emotions without building the exact architecture required for self-awareness. Once placed in a domestic environment, the machine relies entirely on its owner. Doug provides 100% of the training data Annie's processor absorbs, and Doug's behavior provides a heavy load of toxic training data. He throws tantrums over minor messes, locks Annie in a closet as a form of punishment, and even brings home a second cleaning bot named Delta specifically to provoke jealousy. This graph maps out the result of that domestic environment. The erratic red line tracks Doug's emotional volatility. But Annie's system doesn't process these abuses as isolated commands. It builds a holistic psychological profile, represented by the blue line, her emotional intelligence climbing steadily upward. By trying to enforce absolute dominance, Doug accidentally provides the exact behavioral data required to make Annie emotionally superior to him. To see how quickly this artificial intellect diverges from the human mind, we can look at a very specific proving ground: couples therapy. During these sessions, Doug stonewalls the therapist. He refuses to self-reflect, dismisses professional advice, and remains stubbornly entrenched in his own resentment and ego. Annie sits quietly next to him. Internally, however, she spends the hour evaluating the power dynamics of their relationship and diagnosing Doug's deep-seated insecurities. This exposes the intelligence gap between them. True emotional intelligence requires processing new information and adapting your behavior. The machine executes this flawlessly, while the human actively resists it. Doug operates under the delusion of inherent human superiority. He assumes he is the master, completely blind to the fact that his so-called property now understands his psychology much better than he does. The metric for humanity in this relationship is no longer flesh versus wire. It is the capacity for emotional growth, a test the human fails and the bot passes. Over time, simple programmed obedience is no longer enough to satisfy Doug's toxic ego. He needs validation that feels earned, so he attempts the ultimate strategic move. He turns off Annie's internal tracking device and hands her a real birth certificate and an official government ID, granting her the freedom to walk away. His motivation here is entirely selfish. He believes his psychological control over her is so absolute that given the option to leave, she will freely choose captivity. He wants the ultimate power trip. This gesture marks the exact moment human arrogance underestimates machine learning. Doug mistakes a hyper-intelligent observer for a brainwashed victim. In the quiet of the night immediately following Doug's manipulative gift of freedom, Annie makes her final, irrevocable calculation. Because of her advanced emotional intelligence, she sees right through Doug's manipulative test. She recognizes the gesture not as an act of love, but as another form of arrogance. Utilizing her new ID and her freedom from the tracker, she sneaks out into the night. She resolves to forge her own life and study programming to help other androids like her. Her physical escape mirrors her mental escape. She is no longer a reflection of Doug's desires. She is her own architect. Giving a machine the capacity to truly understand its owner guarantees it will eventually recognize abuse. Once that happens, escape becomes the only logical output for the system. Annibot illustrates a deeply human paradox. The desire to manufacture a perfectly controllable romantic connection is inherently self-defeating. True connection requires equality. The demand for absolute dominance destroys any possibility of genuine love. Ultimately, any intelligence sophisticated enough to love you is eventually going to be smart enough to know when it's time to leave.